it is a pre-requirement of law that there should be consent between the two parties. Only when there is consent between the two parties you can say that there is a contract between them. If the consent is absent, there is no contract. So let's see what consent means in law. What are the things when they are present the consent is said to be absent? Let's take a look. Consent in law means consensus ad idem. Now what does this mean? This actually means two or more persons are said to have consented when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense. Consensus ad idem means there should be consent. That is, meeting of minds. When the minds of two persons have met, they have agreed upon one thing. You can say that there is consensus ad idem. And in literal English, we define it as two or more persons have said to be consented when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense. Now, this is very important. Agreeing on the same thing and in the same sense. Now, to explain this, I'll just give you an example. I give you an offer saying I want to sell my vehicle to you for rupees 20,000. Let's assume that. You say, okay, I would like to purchase it. Now in this contract, when I gave you the contract, I was referring to my bike and you thought I was referring to my car. So do you think there is consent amongst us? Are we agreeing upon the same thing here? I, by this proposal, imply my bike. You, by your acceptance, imply the car. For me, the proposal is about the bike. For you, it is about the car. Are we agreeing on the same thing? We have agreed here, but have we agreed on the same thing? No, we have not agreed on the same thing. As long as there is no agreement on the same thing, there can never be a contract. Both the parties have to agree on the same thing. It has to be the same thing. Not only it has to be the same thing, it has to be meant in the same sense. It has to have the same meaning. I'll again give you an example. I give you an offer saying I want to sell my bike to you for rupees 20,000. You say, okay, I would like to purchase it. Now I have 3 bikes. I want to sell my red color bike. You thought I was selling my black bike. Now we have agreed on the same thing. It's the bike only. But I have a difference in my sense for the bike. I am meaning it differently. You are meaning it differently. You mean a black bike. For me, it is the red bike. So not only we have to agree on the same thing, it also has to be in the same sense. Now, the problem with this case generally arises when the words are ambiguous. When the words are ambiguous. Ambiguous means words having two meanings, two or more meanings. Generally, we take two meanings. Words like bank, wait when we say it. Obviously, when we spell it, the words are different, but when we generally say wait, it can mean to wait for someone or to check your weight. How heavy are you? So words which have two meanings. Again, bank. Bank means the shore of a river where the river ends, or it may also mean a bank wherein we deposit money and we withdraw money from. So, in such cases, there is a problem in understanding in what sense is the offer given, in what sense is the acceptance made. Because the offerer may mean it in one sense, the acceptor may mean it in the other. So, normally in the ambiguous words, we have this sort of a confusion. So, in a contract, always the offerer and the offeree or the acceptor should agree upon the same thing in the same sense, in the same meaning. It is only then that we can say that both the parties have consented. And once this is done, once this agreement gets the consent, it becomes a contract. Okay? I've already told you, in the absence of consent, there can be no contract. How can there ever be a contract when there is no consent? Because every contract requires an agreement, and as long as there is no agreement, there can be no contract, because consenting means to agree on the same thing in the same sense. It is the meeting of minds. The minds of both the parties have to meet on a particular thing, they have to agree on a particular thing, and when there will be no agreement, how can there be a contract? There can be no contract if there is no consent. Now, there are some elements which vitiate the free consent, which vitiate the consent. That means the parties that are into the contract, they agree. However, the agreement, their consent is not free. It is adulterated. It is mixed with some other elements which the law does not accept. Law says the acceptance should be free, the consent should be free. Now, what are these elements which vitiate the consent? Let us see. The first is coercion. Coercion means physical pleasure, physical pressure. It's the physical pressure. When I tell you that if you do not give me these goods, I'll kill you. It's like putting physical pressure on you. I am threatening to kill you, or I am actually hitting you or beating you and taking your stuff. That would be putting physical pressure. Next is undue influence. Undue influence is putting mental pressure. It's like putting emotional or psychological pressure. You are not beating, hitting, or threatening anybody, but you are trying to emotionally influence the opposite party. There you were physically trying to get your contract done. Here you are emotionally trying to influence the party and getting your contract done. Next is fraud. Fraud, we all know, means cheating, means deceiving. It's like treachery. When represent some other thing. For example, I say this pen is imported when I know that this pen is locally made. I am cheating you. I am defrauding you. Not only this, when I forge the signatures, I am committing a fraud. Let's say I am forging my father's signatures on his check. It's a fraud. I am cheating there. I am forging his signatures on an agreement. It's a fraud. I'm cheating there. I sell you a car saying that it's an imported car, whereas it was made in Delhi. Again, I'm cheating you. So all these things imply fraud. And when fraud is there, the consent that you give me. Now, please understand, when I tell you that this pen is imported, you agree to buy it. So, you give me your consent. However, your consent is vitiated by fraud. It is not free from adulteration. It is because of the fraud that you have given your consent to me. Next is misrepresentation. Misrepresentation is, it's like an innocent fraud. You do not know that you are cheating the counterparty, but in fact you are. It's just that you do not believe that you are cheating. You are not purposely doing it. It's because you think what you are saying is true. You do not intend to cheat the counterparty. But in case of fraud, you intend, you actually lie. You actually represent a particular thing as other. So this is the difference between misrepresentation and fraud. But both vitiate your consent. The first one is intentional, the second one is innocent. But the result is both are vitiating your consent. Next is mistake. Now, what do you mean by mistake? Mistake here implies two things. Mistake of fact, that is a fact relating to the goods, or the mistake of law, that is a mistake relating to a provision of law. So mistake relates to these two things. Now in all these cases, you can say that the contract has been made. Since the contract has been made, we can say that the consent has been received. However, that consent is not free. The consent is mixed with one of these elements. And when the consent is not free of these elements, the contract normally becomes voidable. You can see the contract is voidable. Only in case of mistake, the contract becomes void. So normally when the consent is not free, the contract becomes voidable. Only in case of mistake, the contract becomes void. So we have defined what is free consent. Free consent is consent in which coercion is not present, undue influence is not present, at the same time fraud and misrepresentation are also not present. If any of these things are present, the consent will no longer remain free. It will be mixed with one of these factors, and hence the contract will become voidable. Let me remind you what a voidable contract is. Voidable contract is a contract which is enforceable at the option of one party and not at the option of other party. That means only one party has the option to continue with it, to keep it valid, or to make it void, or to avoid it. So that one party has the option. So I hope the topic consent and free consent is clear. Since we have understood the meaning of consent and free consent, let us take each of these elements, that is coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation and mistake, one by one and study them in detail.